The mission of FSU Coach is to prepare and equip the next generation of coaches and sports professionals with best practices and current research to enable them to pursue excellence. We have two academic programs, the online graduate certificate, which is 4 classes, and also a 10-class master's in athletic coaching. Our graduate certificate and master's program can be started at any time, either the summer, fall, or spring. All of our classes have the word coach or coaching in them, and they're taught by coaches for coaches.
The types of classes that we offer focus on the athlete as a whole person. We focus on the theory and practice, the research, the helping skills, even some of the mental performance behind, what it goes into being an athlete. I came to FSU Coach because I truly believed in the mission and the purpose of the program.
I think I have my dream job being a head coach at Florida State, but I know there's always more ways that I can help my athletes and better prepare as a coach, so I thought joining this master's program would help me learn different ways to attack my job. If you're interested in going into coaching or joining the FSU Coach program, I would just say don't even think about it and do it.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to FSU Coach Live. My name is Tim Baghurst, and today's special guest is Dan Gill. Is it? Yeah, it is Gill. I had to think. I haven't talked to you for a couple of months, so I had to think, Dan. Thanks so much for joining me. If you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got into the position of being a high school athletic director.
Oh, good afternoon, Tim. Thanks for having me. It's a real honor to see you again, and always appreciate the good work you're doing down at in Tallahassee with FSU Coach. I am currently the athletic director at the Episcopal School of Dallas in Dallas, Texas. This is year 6 for me, which in athletic director years is about year 16, but it's my 15th year overall as an AD, and I've served in 3 other states prior to coming here to ESD in Ohio, New York, and Florida, as you well know, and also spent 4 years as the head basketball coach at a private Catholic high school just outside Buffalo, New York. So for me, this is, a lot of people like to say a bad day in sports is a good day in the real world. So for me, this has been a great opportunity to combine my passion for working with young people in combination with the best industry there is, which is that in sports.
I was speaking to a group of athletic directors last week, actually, fortunately in person, and one of the things that I heard a lot of was how difficult it is as an athletic director to put aside your own sporting preferences and maybe the favoritism of fans or boosters or donors to your programs and really be impartial and be able to support all the programs. What sports do you have in your school, and how do you manage that as an athletic director, showing that equality and fairness?
Yeah, so we have 20 sports overall here at ESD spread over 3 seasons. And I think the mindset that I try to have and share this with my staff is we're in the experience industry, which we are trying to provide kids across a number of different cross sections from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And we are trying to provide them with a great experience. And you do that by surrounding yourself with people who share that vision and philosophy, which is how we try to attack all the different oversights and policies that we put in place, which is to serve all the kids in our 20 different sports that we offer here.
But I'm going to push on that and say that's great, but there are sports that are smaller and there are sports that are bigger. Funding goes to some sports more than others. How do you make those decisions, those hard decisions where it's okay, you know what, we can't provide you with this right now. We have to put money in this instead.
That's where I consider myself pretty fortunate here is I have a staff that appreciates transparency and openness, even if it relates to tough conversations. And I think oftentimes you hear people crave transparency and openness, but only when it's relative to good news. And I think on the flip side, it's even more so when you talk about having to share some bad news or a pet project that a certain sport might like to have, but you can't fund it. And down here at ESD, we are well resourced with a very strong functioning booster club, capital projects that I think are in support of our philosophy and vision, which is to provide kids with a great experience. And we try to share that with our coaches and staff here about all the different intricacies that go into the decision-making process. And I think more than ever, people really value that transparency and openness as it relates to your processes and procedures.
Yeah. When you look at coaching in a public school versus a private school and being an athletic director in both of those, what are some of the maybe pluses and minuses associated with being in a private school like yourself?
You know, I cut my teeth in public education. I'm a public school graduate, so I've seen this through both lenses as a student athlete in a public institution, and then now going into my 15th year in all at private ones. So it's kind of an interesting perspective that you have the ability to see it on both sides. You know, for us in a private school, and this is not any sort of slight on our public counterparts, but we're a mission-based institution. So everything we do is to support the mission of the institution. That relates to our personnel searches, our policies, and our procedures that I want our coaches and staff to always default to. How does this decision impact the mission of the institution? And if our coaches and staff can say that they've made a decision that's in support of that, then I think it's really easy for us to complement the institution's mission. And we do that through the teacher-coach model. I think the best way to implement mission-appropriate programs is by having mission-appropriate coaches, and you do that in support of those that are acting as full-time employees throughout the course of the school day.
Mm. Listen, I'm getting some feedback again on your audio. If you would mind, just jump back on, we'll keep going.
Is that better, Tim? I'm not sure what's
Yes.
going on here.
Yeah, we're good. Thank you.
Sorry
Okay,
about
so that's all right. So to continue this discussion, we like winning. Parents like winning, players like winning, coaches like winning, everybody likes winning. How then do you balance that? We support the mission versus you're not being successful on the field or court or pool or wherever you're competing. Like how do you balance that?
Yeah, you know, we're in the education business now, I think, as well. In addition to serving kids and coaches, you're also trying to educate parents. And it's really hard to be a parent in 2022 as a father of 5, all under the age of 12, and just seeing what our parents are struggling with kids in middle school and upper school. You really have to remember that you're in the education business of parents as well. And I think one of the values of being a mission-based institution is our ability to articulate that through the lens of sports. And as you know, athletics at any institution is oftentimes considered the front porch of your school. So how you articulate what your philosophy is ultimately defines your ability to educate your parents on what success looks like. And you're right, we all aspire to win. I want our coaches to have that as an objective. I want them to have the resources available to them to accomplish that objective. But our baseline is always going to be how we can best support the mission of our institution.
Now, one of the challenges that you have that maybe a head coach, well, sometimes a head coach, certainly less so an assistant coach has, is evaluation of your employees and your staff. I'm curious how you carry that out. Is it an annual thing? Is it observations? Is it word of mouth? How do you evaluate coaches on whether they are achieving what you want them to achieve?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above, and I think it's constantly evolving. As the demands on coaches increase, you have to subsequently be able to pivot about what your core beliefs are of a successful coach. And I think we're starting to see all the different demands that are put on our coaches that are part-time adjunct coaches or even ones that are full-time. So you're trying to refine exactly what your goals are to determine whether or not a coach is successful. And you do that through all the different different aspects that you touched upon. It's your observations. It's their ability to engage and make meaningful relationships with kids. It's their ability to run all the different administrative aspects that are required to execute a very sound, efficient program. And it's certainly, are we best serving the institution's mission? Is this a mission appropriate coach? And what we do here at ESD, and it's been an evolution as well. As you pivot based upon the needs of your coaches, you have to pivot on how you articulate to them. But we have a preseason coaches meeting where we go through some of the touch points that might be coming down from our head of school that we think are important to share with coaches. Then we have areas of focus in our department on policies and procedures and things we want them to be mindful of. And then we also try to be somewhat proactive in being mindful of some of the things that are being discussed on a larger scale nationally. So think right now of NIL. It's even filtering down to the high school level and what we're doing to educate our coaches on best practices in NIL, even though the state of Texas is not an NIL state for high school athletes. Think of things related to DEI and social justice, and making sure your coaches have the tools necessary to navigate that. I then have monthly touch-base meetings with our head coaches throughout the course of the season, just to see where we are informally on some of those goals. But I think more importantly, to see what I can do to help support them and navigate and troubleshoot issues that they're having throughout the course of the season. At the end of the season, we have an end-of-year evaluation meeting, but I also ask our head coaches to evaluate their staff members as well. So it's kind of a funnel down approach to make sure that everybody 7 to 12 is receiving the necessary feedback they need to be successful here.
I'm going to talk about hiring here in a second, but one of the challenges I think that any of us who are in the leadership position is when we've evaluated those people who work with us or for us, sometimes we've got to let those people go. And I'm curious what kind of process you go through in making that determination and how you actually do it, because a lot of people who are watching are one day going to be leaders and have to make hard decisions that affect families, that affect other people, affect teams. How do you go through that process yourself?
Outside of cutting a child from your team, moving on from a coach is singularly the hardest conversation that you have throughout the course of a year. And it's certainly one that I'm always mindful. I think people judge your ability to articulate that by your bedside manner. And you need to be sympathetic in your approach to that, because I have never in 15 years in 4 different states worked with a coach who wanted to go above and beyond to provide a child with a negative experience. It just doesn't exist. People don't get in this industry to not provide kids with a great experience. So I think you need to take a tactful approach to those conversations, knowing that sometimes they just might not be the right fit for your school. Doesn't make them a bad coach. It doesn't mean they're not successful, maybe in another institution, but fit is so predominantly important to your institution's culture when you're defining whether or not a coach has the ability to be successful in your institution. And I try to be helpful in that approach, is to not just say, hey, we're going to move on from you, but try and find avenues for them to move on, to be a point of reference, to give them some tangible feedback on things they can improve on and where they can find those areas in order to develop what their deficiencies may be. And sometimes, Tim, it might be they're just not the right fit as a head coach. Maybe they're an uber successful coordinator, assistant coach, middle school coach, and trying to find another institution where they could be of value to them, because I want people to aspire to be coaches. That is a thing that's a deficiency right now, I think, nationwide, is we don't have enough coaches. So you don't want to run people off that have aspirations to be in this industry. You want to try and help them find a pathway where they can be successful.
I've got a question for you in the chat box I want to get to. Before we get to that, we need more coaches. Tim Hansen says, how does the school decide which sport to pick and support through boosters and curriculum?
Yeah, so for us, it's important that we have an overarching booster club here at ESD that supports all of our athletic programs, so they're not sports specific. and we have the ability then to navigate what the resources we have available to us and have an ability to allocate those accordingly throughout all of our 20 sports here at ESD. You know, in the curriculum process, because our athletic program is tied to PE, it's really kind of a seamless transition across those two entities when you're trying to decide exactly what athletic success looks like in our institution, because it is directly tied to curriculum and the ability to earn academic credit.
So does that mean that some sports will just never appear in your curriculum because the PE teacher doesn't teach it or can't teach it?
Yeah, we have made a conscious focus to hire as many full-time coaches we have across the board, regardless of what sport that is. So of our 20 sports that we offer, 16 of those head coaches currently are full-time employees of the school, which means we're doing a really good job of navigating, recruiting, and developing people that can be teachers, coaches, and coaches as teachers, because those fundamentally are the best way to articulate your institution's mission in each one of those programs. As you know, there's a different cross-section of sports in every state that I would quantify as niche sports. You know, so for us, just think in the context of field hockey. Field hockey in the state of Texas is somewhat of a niche sport that we had to cast a very wide net to recruit someone to come and be our head field hockey coach / program director. And they came from the hotbed of field hockey, which is the Northeast. And they're trying to bring some of the success and values that they had from that area of the country here to Texas so that we can grow and develop our program accordingly.
I got you. All right, let's go back to hiring. I want to show you, I think you've seen this. This was at the Texas High School Coaches Association. and I took this picture, right, and posted it on social media. And there were quite a few comments about that in the sense that we do have a lot of schools looking for coaches, and we don't have many coaches looking for jobs. And I was in Florida last week. I was talking to a county athletic director, and he said, I had a meeting with all my ADs, and I said, what do we need? Do we need wins or do we need warm bodies? And the answer was, we need warm bodies. Okay, so we need more coaches. How do you, if you put yourself in a decision-making position to generate more coaches, what's lacking? What do we need to change in order to have more coaches available?
Yeah, I think what coaches are finding is that people pleasing can feel like a personal prison at times. And I think that's one of the struggles with the coaches that are available right now, is they're constantly trying to please so many different constituency bases on a regular basis that they lose focus about what their objective is, which is to serve their staff and serve their kids with a great experience. And I say that with the caveat, the level of subjectivity now that coaches are exposed to is much different than it was when I got my start. I didn't really have to deal with Twitter and Facebook and some of the different things that you have to use to promote your program on top of NIL, on top of, you know, all the different professional development obligations you have, to include risk management strategies and child protective obligations that we all have in our various capacities. So when you consider all the different demands that are placed on a coach on a daily basis in order for them just to get through their day, and then you look at on a personal level for them what that return on investment is from a compensatory standpoint, there's an imbalance that's going on here that I think we need to be mindful of. And I'm going to toss officials in that basket too, Tim. I think if you were to take that same picture and incorporate schools looking for officials and officials looking for jobs, there would be a lot of parallels in that conversation. And I think we're at I don't want to call it a breaking point, but I think we're at a fork in the road from an industry standpoint on what the ultimate objective is for coaches in 2022 and moving forward. And I'm going to go back to the old-fashioned buzzword about what's your culture. So I've made approximately 14 different head coaching hires during my time at ESD. And each one of those times, at some point in the first 3 questions that a candidate asks, they're asking me about what our culture is, to include our parent culture as well. And I think coaches are starting to realize that, yes, compensation is really important. Work-life balance is really important. But what are the tangible goals that you're trying to accomplish within the confines of your institution's culture. And they are gravitating towards schools that value coaches, that support coaches, and think that coaches are very critical to the overall student life experience that you're providing. And we've been really fortunate here to kind of blend all those different entities together that I think makes our culture here at ESD somewhat unique from our counterparts. Now, eventually, we're going to have to pivot because we've made significant strides in that area, but people are going to respond to that. And conceivably, we're going to have to pivot to the changing needs of our workforce. And what do I mean by that? I mean professional development. What are we doing to give coaches the tools to be successful long-term at our institution? Because it's not just the recruiting process, it's the development process, and it's the retaining process that I think are critically important avenues in the next 2, 3, 4 years that we're going to have to be very mindful of.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's the fact that we don't have coaches and we don't have people who want to coach. I think the challenge is that we're not retaining those coaches when they come into our programs because of, as you alluded to, the parents, the paperwork, the add-ons such as social media, the pressure to perform from day one. And then all of a sudden they look at their stipend, and in Florida, let's be real here, it's about on average $2,500 per sport. They go, why am I spending all these hours doing this for this little pay? And all I do is get abuse. I'm out of here. And we see an average of about a 3-year term as a coach. If there's one thing we could do right now that may not be systemic or long-term, what can we do? Is it find ways to pay more coaches? What do you think?
There's some, things that I think every institution can do to help your coaches. And just, I'd like to call them guardrails. We talk here at ESD about how we communicate internally. So I don't want coaches, once they leave the practice field at 6:30, 7 o'clock, to get home at the dinner table with their kids and be checking their phone because there's an email that someone has sent from my staff or another part of campus. So we've tried to define a window of about 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, unless it's a stealth agenda item that you need to immediately connect with the coach on, give them that 12-hour window in between there to catch their collective breath. That it is okay to not be tied to your iPhone, tweeting, responding to emails, responding to text messages. It's okay to check out for a little bit. We encourage our full-time employees here to grab a workout, eat lunch every day, get away from your desk and find an outlet where you can just decompress a little bit from the emotions and the stress that are going to be coming from behind your desk on a regular basis. And then on holidays, when we're out, I really encourage my staff to be out. It is okay to just completely disconnect over a religious holiday, over a winter break, a Thanksgiving break. And if there's a stealth agenda item, then pick up the phone and call someone, but don't be pinging their phone in those non-peak hours unless it's something that they need to be really responsive to. We do encourage our coaches here to have a 24-hour window with parent conflict, with emails, just to make sure that the customer service piece is being fulfilled. But it is okay to take a step back when you feel it's time to take a step back. And as we've gravitated more towards full-time employees as coaches here at ESD, PTO is a benefit that we expect you to use. So, when you have, personal days and sick days, it's okay to use them. And we talk a lot here about athletic department healthcare. Mental health of coaches is just as important as it is for the students that we're here to serve. So if you feel like you're being overwhelmed as a coach or you need to check out for a day, that's why you have a support staff. That's why we're trying to develop middle school coaches to come up and be sub-varsity coaches and sub-varsity coaches to have aspirations to be head coaches or varsity level coaches. So when you feel the need to delegate for a day, for a practice, for a film session, it's okay. The days of just grinding out coaches and expecting them to do that, 16 to 18 hours a day, 6-7 days a week throughout the course of a 3.5-4 month season, it's not conducive to their overall success. And I want to stress to principals, to ADs, to superintendents that athletic department healthcare is critically important to recruiting, sustaining, and developing coaches in your institution.
I'm just taking notes as a reminder because some of these things are very valuable and worth sharing again. With the policies and procedures that you have in place to support coaches, and you're one of the very first people I've heard that actually has this many things in place where it is okay to take time off. Because more often than not, as you said, coaches tend to do the opposite. They tend to, when things are hard, they tend to double down and work harder rather than work less. Have you seen less attrition in your school than maybe equitable private schools in Texas?
Yes, and putting my coaching hat on, Tim, I think that was one of my deficiencies. If I was to, do a retrospective of my 4 years as a head coach at St. Mary's in Western New York, I felt an inherent pressure as a young head coach. I was 24 when I got my first head coaching and AD job, that I had to outwork everybody and prove that I was the smartest guy in the room, regardless of my age. It was an inherent pressure that I gave myself. It didn't come from our school president. It didn't come from my staff. It was an internal one that I felt that I had to earn every day. And I think that was a burnout situation that I felt, after year 4 there, where I wasn't being a great dad, I wasn't being a great husband. And as you know, if you're not successful in those two entities, there's no way you're going to be successful in your role as a head coach if you're not, being a great partner, a great spouse, a great dad, a great mother, whatever it might be. You have to do those two things well if you're going to be a head coach well. If you were to have asked me in 2008, was that a priority? Absolutely not. I wanted to win. I wanted to get as many kids as I could to the next level. But I think you mature and pivot in this industry based upon what your observations are. And that is one that I've taken to heart here. As far as to your initial question about attrition, I don't want a coach to leave here because he thinks our culture is not supportive. Now, if a coach, is our head JV coach and goes to get a head coaching job leading his own program, that's great. And that's a testament to our institution, because that coach has been given the professional development opportunities to take on a greater leadership position. That's okay. But I don't ever want to have coaches leaving for lateral positions because we're not paying market value for their services, or they think our culture is not one that can support their long-term interests.
Okay, think now from the perspective of being a coach, from a perspective of being an athletic director. What are 2 or 3 things that you would like to pass on that other coaches and ADs really need to know in order to be better at what they do?
I think one is pacing when you're making changes. Looking that first 30, 60, 90 days at a school, pace that change. Make observations, make notes. You don't have to come in and change in a culture overnight. Culture change is a part of changing systemic habits over time. So slowly integrating that change over the course of a period of time, I think gives you a lot of equity with coaches, instead of coming in and trying to make those initial changes overnight. How you communicate those changes is fundamentally the most important thing to culture change, is how you are communicating that, good, bad, and indifferent, to all of your constituents. And that includes kids. I think kids build relationships with coaches over time, and they don't always understand the business aspect of coaching changes. So I think you have an obligation to get in front of them and articulate that as best as you can, because we owe that to kids when you're talking about making changes in personnel in your department. And the last thing is you want to leave unified. I think when you have staff meetings, when you have coaches meetings, and you're talking about change, you want to have coaches, provide their feedback about the changes that you're making, but you have to stress the importance of them of walking out unified. the number one thing that can occur when you're trying to make effective culture change is it gets undermined from those around you. And if you're not taking a collaborative approach in how you communicate that change when you're having your staff meetings, I think your success rate is going to be undermined pretty quickly. And that's not healthy for an institution to have a lot of rapid change in your head coaching ranks, your support staff ranks, and certainly behind my desk to include that as well. So you want to be really mindful of those three aspects when you're talking about taking on a new position.
Can you give an example of the unified thing is an interesting one, right? Because a lot of times you want to make a change and there's two or three who don't like it. And so they go away and, spread rumors or whatever it may be. Can you give an example of a change that you've had to make that required this kind of unified front, even though everybody wasn't necessarily on board?
Yeah, anytime you talk about strategic planning, you have to remember it's an evergreen process.
So I'll talk about strategic planning.
So, you come in with this bold vision and things that have worked effectively, perhaps at previous places you've been, or maybe things you did as a coach. It's not a one size fits all concept. So the most effective leaders are ones that can kind of adapt to their environment. Now, you have your core beliefs, you have your core philosophies, but when you're talking about policy change, procedure change, you have to remember that those things are an evergreen process. And people are oftentimes, I think when you have so much change on a rapid basis, that a silo mentality develops. And usually that's where the conflict originates from is coaches have been in a silo mentality, just doing what was in the best interest of their program and not looking how that impacts the totality of your department. And we all know, whether you're a private institution or a public one, people are making admissions decisions based upon the perception of their athletic experience at your school. And we feel a tremendous amount of competition in a 5-mile radius here in Dallas, where we have very successful public school programs, very successful private ones, and certainly very successful Catholic ones, that we have to do things that may be different than others in order to be very competitive in a competitive marketplace. So how you sell that change to coaches, I think, is fundamentally very important. But I want to differentiate between buy-in and commitment. Those are two very different things to me. If I have to get a coach to buy into something, that means I've probably had to sell them on what that vision is. When you get a coach or a staff member who's committed to what you're doing, that means they're all in. And those two conversations are very different. And I think oftentimes leaders say, I don't have the buy-in. Well, buy-in is not something that I necessarily aspire to have. I want coaches to be committed to what we're trying to accomplish. And the way you do that is being very refined in what those objectives are. And I think schools try to be, great at 9 or 10 things. I'm trying to be the best at 2 or 3. And if we're the best at 2 or 3 things in our marketplace, I think that's very unique to our immediate competition.
So what are those 2 or 3 things you're trying to be best at?
Yeah, first and foremost, Tim, we want to be running mission appropriate programs. And I have alluded to that on several occasions, because I think that is a core belief for our department and a core belief for us as an institution. And you do that by combining those two entities together. We want athletics and academics to run parallel with each other to provide the best student life experience that we possibly can. Our aspiration here at ESD is to be like, Duke, Northwestern, Stanford, Notre Dame, where you have those two institutions having great academics complemented by a great athletic experience that they're providing for their student athletes. And I say that as a Buckeye, true and true, as an Ohio State grad, but that is aspirationally not what we want to be. So you do that. The second thing is you want to make sure that you're providing your kids with a great experience. And you do that through, informal engagements with them on a daily basis. So think of little things like, when your kids are stretching for that 10 or 15 minutes, don't see that as wasted time to look at your phone or walk around the practice field. Make a diligent effort to just connect with every single kid that's stretching during that time. It can be as simplistic as a fist bump, but just to make sure that you know that their presence is being felt at your practice. When I was coaching, I had a great staff, and I would say to each one of them, okay, you've got your subset of position groups that I want you to connect with after practice today. So one of my assistants was responsible for guards. One of my assistants was responsible for the bigs. Hey, just shoot everybody a text message after practice and get some feedback. Little engagements like that go a long way through the totality of your process when you're trying to define what a successful experience looks like for a kid. And to me, the best teachers are coaches, and the best coaches are teachers. So when kids see them throughout the confines of your hallway prior to practice, it's really easy to articulate a great experience for them once you get to the practice field. So for me, those would be two benchmarks. But the last one that's kind of come about here the last few years, as we've seen a shortage in coaches nationwide, is we want to recruit, we want to develop, and we want to sustain. And that requires a partnership with your division heads. That requires a partnership with your HR office to define what the compensation rates in the marketplaces and nationwide for coaches in their respective fields. And I think that is something that everybody, regardless of if you serve a public or private institution, you have to be on the forefront of that hard conversation.
That's great feedback, great content. If somebody does have a question for you, listening to our podcast later, watching on YouTube, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, I'm in a service industry, Tim. So anybody, if it's a question from a parent, question from a coach, a question from a fellow AD, I value the ability to help you navigate this very critical time in the transition of our industry. So feel free to reach out via email is probably the best route. GillD@esdallas.org. There is no such thing as a stupid question. There's only the question that
there is. Some of us who teach, there is, I promise you.
But I've been in your situation before as a 24-year-old aspiring AD who didn't know how to order a bus, who didn't know how to build a budget. So I'm here to give back as much as people are willing to receive.
Well, Dan, thanks so much for just spending some time with us and sharing a little bit of your wisdom. And I hope people do reach out with their questions and comments. Just a reminder, everybody, we try to be online one or two times a week. Be sure to subscribe to YouTube or Spotify, Anchor, wherever you're listening to the podcast, so that you make sure you get notification when we do go live and then when we post these after the fact. But on behalf of myself, Tim Baghurst, and Dan Gill, thanks so much for watching.
Thanks, Tim.